Chapter 4, Calculated Encounters, Calculated Risks. The following weeks were a masterclass in calculated casualness, a subtle siege orchestrated by Apollo Polo Reyes. He infiltrated my summer, appearing with infuriating, exhilarating regularity, turning the sleepy town of Belbridge into his personal hunting ground. He'd accidentally bump into me at the Saturday farmer's market, a vision of effortless perfection in a crisp white linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned muscular forearms. He'd lean against a stall overflowing with sunflowers, their faces tilted towards the sun, ostensibly admiring the organic produce, but his eyes, those intense glacier blue eyes, were always on me. He'd buy a single perfect peach, its skin a velvety blush, and bite into it with slow, deliberate sensuality, the juice running down his chin, and I'd find myself inexplicably mesmerized, my mouth watering, my core clenching. It was a blatant, almost theatrical display, and yet, it worked. He'd happened to be jogging past the botanical gardens during my lunch break, his route conveniently intersecting with my favorite quiet spot under the ancient oak. He'd stopped to chat, his smile disarming, his body glistening with sweat, the thin fabric of his performance t-shirt clinging to his chest, outlining the hard planes of his muscles, the faint shadow of his nipples. He'd talk about mundane things, the heat, the upcoming football season, his summer classes, but the air between us crackled with unspoken tension, a palpable energy that made my skin prickle with awareness. He even showed up at the book nook, pretending to browse the poetry section, his large frame incongruous amidst the narrow aisles and teetering stacks of books. He asked my opinion on Neruda, his fingers brushing mine as he handed me the book, the contact sending a jolt of electricity through me. The scent of him, clean, musky, with a hint of citrus, invaded my safe space, a stark contrast to the comforting smell of old paper and dust. Each encounter was a carefully choreographed dance, a game of cat and mouse where the roles blurred. He'd brush against me, accidentally at the market, his fingers lingering on my arm for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. He'd lean in close to ask a question about a particular orchid in the gardens, his warm breath feathering against my ear, making me shiver. He'd use double entendres, his voice a low, suggestive rumble that made me blush. "That's a beautiful rose," he'd say, his eyes fixed firmly on me, "not the flower. Reminds me of you, delicate but with hidden thorns. I like a challenge." I try to maintain my composure, to deflect his advances with a cool smile, a sarcastic retort, but my body betrayed me. My heart would pound, my skin would flush, and a warmth would spread through my limbs, pooling low in my belly. It was a raw, undeniable response, a traitorous desire I couldn't control. Against my better judgment, I even found myself attending a few of the infamous Phi Delta Gamma parties. I told myself it was to hang out with Riv, who surprisingly seemed to be thriving in this environment, finding a connection with the fraternity's more artistic, less mainstream members. But I knew, deep down, that I was hoping to see Polo, to feel that electric spark, that dangerous pull. The parties were a sensory overload. The pulsing music, the thick air heavy with the scent of beer and cologne, the press of bodies on the dance floor. Polo, in his element, was even more magnetic, more dangerous. He'd greet me with a smile that was both welcoming and possessive, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, a subtle but unmistakable claim. But he also kept his distance, a calculated move that both frustrated and intrigued me. He wouldn't monopolize my time, allowing me to mingle, to dance with others, though his eyes always seemed to be watching. He was proving he wasn't the stereotypical, possessive frat boy I'd expected. This subtle shift in his approach, this acknowledgement of my need for independence, was more alluring, more seductive than any overt display of affection. One night, amidst the swirling chaos of a particularly raucous party, I found myself talking to Leander, the giant football player with the surprisingly gentle soul. We were standing near the makeshift bar, a collection of coolers and folding tables, and he was nursing a beer, looking slightly out of place. "So," he said, his voice booming over the music, "you and Polo, huh?" I blushed, taking a quick sip of my mostly watered-down wine. "We're just getting to know each other," I said, the words sounding lame even to my own ears. Leander chuckled, a deep rumbling sound. "Yeah, that's what he said. He's different around you, you know, less guarded, less Polo." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, intrigued. Leander shrugged his massive shoulders. "He's a good guy, Polo, loyal, driven, smart as hell. But he's also, careful, keeps people at arm's length. Except for us, his brothers, we see the real him, and, well, he hasn't looked at anyone the way he looks at you, ever." His words sent a shiver down my spine, a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Was it possible? Could this intensely attractive, seemingly untouchable fraternity president actually be interested in me, the dirt under her fingernails, paint-splattered artist who preferred the company of plants to people? Just then, Zeph slithered up to us. His eyes narrowed, his smile predatory. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his gaze flicking between me and Leander. "Just fine, Zeph," Leander said, his voice losing its warmth, becoming flat and guarded. "Good," Zeph said, his smile not reaching his eyes. He turned to me, his gaze lingering a little too long on my bare shoulders. "Enjoying the party, flower girl?" I bristled at the nickname, at his condescending tone. "It's Flora," I said, my voice tight. "And yes, I am." Zeph chuckled. "Good, glad to hear it. Don't let Reyes monopolize all your time. There are plenty of other options here." He gave me a look that made my skin crawl. Before I could respond, Polo appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, his expression unreadable. "Zeph," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth, "leave her alone." Zeph raised his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "Just being friendly, Reyes. Don't get your boxers in a twist." He smirked, then sauntered off, disappearing into the crowd. Polo turned to me, his blue eyes intense. "Sorry about him," he said, his voice low. "He's a work in progress." "I can see that," I said, trying to keep my voice light despite the sudden pounding of my heart. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, and the familiar electric current sparked between us. "Don't let him bother you," he said, his voice a husky murmur. "He's just jealous." "Jealous?" I asked, my voice a breathless whisper. "Of what?" He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made my stomach flip. "Of us," he said, his gaze locking with mine. And in that moment, surrounded by the noise and chaos of the party, I knew I was in trouble. Deep, deep trouble. The walls I'd so carefully constructed were crumbling, and I wasn't sure I wanted to stop them. The thorns were beautiful, and I was reaching to touch.